She was both feared and revered for the precision with which she exacted her vengeance, defended her ancestral lands, and took her pounds of flesh. Some may know her as the Mother of Darkness. You may know her as Eve, but her father named her Kianja, and in her native tongue it meant beloved daughter. This is the genesis of the first immortal. She grew to be well respected within the ancient metropolis in which she lived, and proudly served as their exceedingly beautiful high priestess. She was a healer and spiritual intercessor to the ancient moon goddess, Nana. In her time there, she had performed countless funeral rites, religious ceremonies, and weddings. And today, it was she who was to be the bride to be married. Her lover, Aradegi, was a highly esteemed commander who helped the king lead his forces to victory in their war-torn lands. She admired his militant prowess and his protective spirit. All she could think about was beginning her new life with him and raising a family together. Her life was perfect. But it seemed the universe had made very different plans for Kianja that afternoon. The wedding celebration had only just begun. Participants and witnesses were crowded around the well at the city's centre. In each of their hands were fistfuls of grains, ready to be tossed upon the newlyweds. Kianja's hair and body were covered in ceremonial oils, perfumed with sweet herbs, honey and flowers. She glistened under the starlight of the great sun above. The full moon that evening was surely an omen of great things to come in her future, of great and terrible things. As the priest raised his hand to pronounce Kianja and Aradegi finally unified, that once warm, blushing sunshine darkened and chilled the land around them. It grew cold, and friends and family shrouded their exposed skin with their woven shawls. They looked to the sky out of bewilderment. Where had the sudden darkness come from? Where had the sun gone? They found, through strained eyes, that the moon had swallowed it whole. Only a faint rim of white light was all that was left of it. And then the winds came. They were unnatural and swirling. Children and elders braced against the strongest amongst them, which included the nearly wedded couple. Aradegi commanded his people to take shelter from the whipping winds with a light heart, while Kianja stepped further out toward the undulating wheat fields. Though it was nearly as dark as night in a matter of moments, Kianja, clad in her beautiful wedding clothes and jewellery, tiptoed into the ever-darkening abyss. She could barely see the stalks of wheat before her. She heard her groom calling helplessly from the village, but the winds were deafening now. She was so disoriented, she began to doubt she was still on Earth. And that's when she heard it through the rustling. A clicking sound, like bones shifting in a burning pyre. The sound of indiscernible chittering both haunted and intrigued her. And it was getting closer. Unexpectedly, a flourish of rattling bones resounding directly behind her sent chills throughout her own. It had been stalking her through the darkness. The moon's tight seal had finally broken, and the light of the sun began to illuminate her surroundings. Kianja spun around to finally lay her watering brown eyes upon the predator in her midst. It was the colour of bone, and half her size, though she wouldn't have known this, had she not noticed that it was levitating above the ground before her. Its skull was round like a bean, and its body was hairless, though its giant wings, which flapped gently but magnificently, were dark and feather-like. Its skeletal arms and legs dangled underneath its hunched, heaving body. One of its limbs started to stretch towards Kianja, who began to lose her breath. She was too stunned to move, and her gaze locked into what she assumed were its small, glass-like eyes. Then, something within her soul connected with something deep inside this horrific vessel. There was something familiar about the creature. She began to reach for it with her chilled, trembling hand. The sun's rays grew stronger, and she could see the visitor begin to depart, as if to chase the shadow of the moon sweeping across the land. It seemed to dance in mid-air, fluttering its powerful wings. Something compelled her to touch it. She couldn't reason herself out of it. There were no thoughts. There was only instinct. She swam her hand toward the monster ever so slowly. It twitched and stirred, but didn't flee as she expected. Its head bent gently towards her hand. As her fingertips made contact with the soft skin of its head, it was like that of a baby's. She delighted in immediate relief. She had overcome her primal fear, and all she could feel was exhilaration. And she felt an energy emanating from the being, a surge of power she's never felt before. It was like the silent lightning that frolics through the clouds on long summer nights. She found herself impatient to discover more from the creature. She was outpacing the rush. But in her deep distraction with the visitor, Kianja failed to hear her husband-to-be approaching with his raised, clattering sword. She could suddenly hear his feet charging through the field from behind her. She turned and shouted to him, which disturbed the winged creature so intensely that it opened its mouth to hiss, revealing several rows of thin, jagged, snake-like fangs. It momentarily clasped onto Kianja's hand, which was resting on its skull, before releasing her. She shrieked in pain and held her hand up to the still strengthening sunlight. 2 deep punctures on the top of her hand began to sting with every pulse. Then 2 bright white bulbs surfaced and foamed on her skin. It felt like her hand had been ignited by fire from the inside. The excruciating pain quickly sent Kianja into a deep sleep. Aradegi caught his beloved's head under his hands as her limp body poured down toward the earth. He raised his sweating brows away from his eyes to search for the creature, but it was gone. The moon had finally lifted its cloak of darkness, and the city was dutifully illuminated by the sun once more. The disquiet of the terrified people peaked as they witnessed their high priestess, the only woman who could soothe their growing worries concerning these strange cosmic events, being helplessly carried into town. Over the next few weeks, Kianja grew more and more ill. Her family became worried she may have gotten sick from the sky beast. The bite hadn't healed, and it was beginning to fester. Her doctors suggested fresh air and vegetables, but she couldn't bear either one. Just the warmth of the sun through the window coverings was enough to send Kianja into hysterics. Her eyes were no longer strong enough to tolerate anything brighter than the light of a lamp or the moon. And her appetite diminished to only meat and wine. And what's worse, her devotion to the goddess of the moon had weakened. After all, it was her that allowed this affliction to corrupt her. It was she who foiled her wedding day, despite years of toil in her name. Kianja became detached from reality. Having not seen the sun for weeks, she lost track of time. Aradegi was ordered away to defend their city from a neighbouring metropolis, and Kianja was left to her own devices to cope alone. She did find solace while on moonlit nights. She found she could see better then. She trained herself to hunt with weapons as well as her bare hands. By the end of the season, she could easily contend with and belay any prey, large or small. And though disturbed by this, she found she incurred a deep satisfaction from ingesting the blood of the game she caught. It seemed to fully heal her body from any injuries or ailments. Yet the many scars from her childhood always remained unaltered. This was something Kianja was grateful for. Aradegi found them beautiful, and she never wanted him to forget them. The blood also relieved her headaches, her sore, aching limbs, and her feeling of unfathomable hunger. In fact, it satisfied her more than food and drink ever could. She had a new understanding of what it was to be fed. But this spawned a new thirst in her. A bloodthirst. And this miraculous revelation would be shuttered by grave news from the warfields. Her soulmate, Aradegi, had been slaughtered along with several other men from their village. Kianja's heart threatened to cease beating upon hearing the reports. After she recovered from the shock, an uncontrolled burning rage began to constrict her thinking, and her appeals to the goddess Nana became more desperate. After long suffering the cold, forsaken silence of unanswered prayers, she drew upon her own new power in the night. If she could not enjoy love in the light of the sun, then she would delight in vengeance in the dark of the moon. And that eternal quest for vengeance would begin in the village of the people who took her beloved away from her. She travelled there on foot, under heavy garments to shield her skin from the brightness of the full moon. She arrived to find a man on guard at the entrance. He was sleepy and full of wine. It was almost too easy. But she underestimated the dozing guard. A quick and accurate swipe of his iron spear sliced the skin of Kianja's stomach, mortally wounding her. She wondered less now how they were able to defeat Aradegi's great army. She grappled with the man and fought valiantly, using tactics she learned from Aradegi, for whom she fought. But the man overcame her and was able to drop a heavy rock down onto her beautiful face, splintering several of her front teeth. Yet Kianja had fought bears twice his size. Her only vice had been her compassion for mankind, but in this moment he was simply prey. She dissolved the courtesies offered by a high priestess and embraced her new true nature, imparted by the visiting sky beast. She stretched open her mouth and pulled herself up toward the straddling defender. Wrapping her jaw around his exposed, sweating neck, she bit down with so much force and intention that she could feel his tendons and arteries explode inside her mouth. The dark, metallic taste of blood overwhelmed her at first, but the satiation of vengeance and the cleansing rush of clarity purified her. She had exacted her first pound of flesh. Upon waking the next night, she found her teeth had healed completely and were no longer broken. In fact, she found there was a second set behind her regenerated ones. Though it took some practice, she was able to retract them at will. They were reminiscent of the long, curved fangs of a snake, and Kianja became proficient in using them for many things, particularly intimidation. In the centuries that followed, she learned she was indestructible to a fault. If she could endure the pain, her body could withstand falls from great heights, remaining submerged under deep water, broken bones, punctures, and even fire to a certain degree. And despite all of Kianja's momentary lapses in motivation to continue the eternal struggle, she had finally come to see this new nature of hers as a blessing from the gods. Her faith was renewed and steadfast. Her atonement and release from this endless crusade of retribution in the name of the moon would not come for thousands of years. And until then, Kianja, Mother of Darkness, High Priestess of the House of Nana, and cast off from the sun-fed Garden of Eden, would scorch the earth, leaving in her wake the debris of a broken heart and shattered dreams.